Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today in this video, I'm going to talk about how to approach an academic article as a practitioner, and then I'm going to use as a specific example a very interesting article on a 15th century Italian astrological magician called Giorgio Anselmi. And I'll give you the link and the name of the article as we get further on, but I wanted to use that as a focus. So what I want to talk about, and I've talked about this before, but I just kind of reiterate this, is that basically when we start doing work in the esoteric field, or astrological magic, or any kind of astrology, any kind of esoteric stuff, we're kind of presented with a choice, and that choice is the typical approach that we see that most people are doing is very, pop, very simplistic. I've sometimes call it New Age approach. Sort of anything goes, make it up as you go along, very relativist. Anyone is as good as anybody else. But like I said, very surface approach. And so people will come into this and they'll say, you know what, I don't want to have that. I want to have a rigorous approach. So then they go to what they think is the other extreme, which is an academic approach. And academics, they've got the prestige in our society. They're the ones who are like, the established reality. They're the scholars. They know it. So, basically we're going to follow that. They have the prestige. Now, what I think we need to recognize is the pitfalls and, in a way that, and there's nothing wrong with the academic approach. We just need to recognize that this may not be the best approach for a practitioner. So one of the key things we have to recognize is that for the academic world, and this is not talking about people's private views, but it's talking about people's public views. Again, what you're going to see in a peer review article, what's going to be taught, not people's behind the scenes private views, is that anything spiritual, including astrology and magic, is fake. Okay? It never existed. It never had any reality in and of itself. So a work of astrological magic is a work of fiction. Okay? Now, it's written by somebody who is either deluded, right, or they're deliberately faking people out. Okay? There's just no two ways about it. And so when you're looking at a particular work of astrology or magic, what you're looking at is something that was invented by a specific author, like I said, made up out of their head. Now, they may, in making the thing up and creating it, have relied on other specific authors' own inventions. So we may have this whole string of made-up fake stuff. So that's basically what you do is that, you, as an academic, you're going to go back and trace back the derivation of this fictional work. You want to find the original author who invented it. So that's why the original, there's such focus on the original, because they're the ones who made up this fake stuff. If you want to find out what's really going on, you need to find that. I mean, and it makes total sense. I mean, if you're studying Faulkner, right, you're going to want to find the original manuscript that he wrote, and you can think about how the editor may have changed it. You may have problems in terms of, for example, in the Middle Ages, everything's in manuscript. It may have been copied wrong. But really, the way of checking the accuracy of it, since it's fictional, is what did the original author make up. Okay? Now, this is very different from a practitioner approach. Because when a practitioner is looking at, an academic writing or a source or whatever, what they're looking for is, they're looking for how to do it, okay? To them, it works. I mean, you wouldn't be practicing if you thought it was totally fake and fictional. You wouldn't try to be doing magic or astrology if it's just totally delusional. And so what you're looking for is a way to, for example, with astrological magic, how do you make talismans? So I'm going to make a talisman. How do I make a talisman? So they use is what I call it, not a fictional approach, but what I call a cookbook approach. So in other words, you're going to have a lot of these books or sources of practical recipes that tell you how to do something. For example, if you don't know anything about, French cooking, go out and buy Julia Child's book, French cooking, like I did. I remember that when I was in college, I got way into that, and got this haute cuisine and making all this stuff. So you try them out. You can use different cookbooks. You can combine things. If you see the underlying principles, you can make up your own recipes. But again, what you're doing is you're working with something that's real, okay? And you're trying to find out ways of, how to make it. So we really have to recognize that, again, with an academic, you're not going to get instructions on how to make things except peripherally, okay? And in fact, Sometimes they'll actually, they won't do a translation, for example. We'll talk about this more later because they don't want people making stuff from it. That upsets them. Um, because it's fake, it's not real, and if people are going to be misusing this academic source that's supposed to be studying it, that's upsetting for them. But again, that's exactly what a practitioner wants to do. So it's just something we need to recognize. That's not to say the academic is bad. It's just they have a different purpose that's going on. Again, like I said, this is fictional. It's not real when we're talking about magic. And they have a scholarly interest in it. So, I mean, and that's true of anything. I mean, even stuff that's real to them, if they're studying sociology, they're not going to be doing anything with that. I mean, if you're studying history, they're not going to make history, right? It's all study. It's all passive, and it's all, just to, like I said, sit back, study it, and have no active use of it yourself or anything like that. Now, you may get some variations that, like, for example, like an ethnomusicologist, they may actually, play the instrument. In sociology, you have participant observers who will go out and they'll actually, participate in the activity or be part of the society or whatever. I mean, there's some really cool books that I've enjoyed um, reading recently. One was about a guy who was a sociologist who got a job as a guard at Sing Sing. And he wrote about that. It was very interesting. Another was again, sociology professor, and she worked for the New York sanitation department. It was like driving garbage trucks and the brush trucks that clean the streets and things like that. So that I think is a really cool approach because they have the background and they can get the grounding and they have the rigor of the academic study, but these are people that are actively engaged in what they consider to be necessary activities or useful activities, or at least they're real, right? So I think that's probably to me the really the best approach is a rigorous approach, but one that's of an active practitioner as well. So moving back and forth between practice and theory. And that's certainly my approach as an attorney. I mean, right now I'm wrestling with some questions. I mean, I specialize in landlord-tenant law. I've got some cases that I'm working on that I'm trying to get the Supreme Court of my state to take. And I'm thinking about what I should be proposing to the Supreme Court as far as how to regulate this particular area, how to deal with the questions. And it's very practical in that I've had 10 or 15 years of actually dealing with landlords and tenants. I know in reality how landlords and tenants are going to act, both positively and negatively. And what I'm thinking about is how can we set up a framework for landlords and tenants to work together. So it's, I think, really a uniquely privileged state to be in because I have this great amount of historical knowledge. I have this great legal knowledge. I have this experience with the statutes and everything like that. I can think about it in an abstract way, but yet I've got this practical experience as well. So combining those in a way that we can have an objective view of things but also deal with reality, I think is really key. And so that's a similar approach that I use in my astrological magic and my astrology practice. So like I said, ultimately when we think about this, it's like we just need to be careful to be able to use the academic source for what it's actually good for practitioners if you're a practitioner, and not be using an academic approach for practitioners. It's just going to lead us astray. Again, not that it's wrong for academics. But if you think about it, I mean, how useful would it be to consult a scholar of pancakes on how to make pancakes when the scholar has never made a pancake, they've never seen a pancake, and they don't even think that pancakes really exist? I don't think you're going to be getting very good advice about how much flour, how much butter to use in them. So, like I said, the academic stuff is good for grounding, good for preliminary understanding, and also good for sources and influences. So again, we're not in this sort of newbie floating around state. We've got some solid foundation for what we're doing in terms of understanding the background. So when we look at a magical practitioner, I think it's true of everybody, certainly true of a master. Every magical practitioner is a combination of previous sources and influences, and then an individual synthesis themselves. And then also their individual experience is going to be reflected in that with the reality of magic and astrology. So today I'm going to talk about this article called Similar Stars and Strange Angels. And it's about Giorgio Anselmi, the astrological magic of Giorgio Anselmi, by Merlin Cox. Now there's a link to this article that's working now. I don't have copies of this article. It's copyrighted. I can't pass them out. So if that link for some reason doesn't work, you just Google search it. I'm not going to be able to provide copies of this particular article for people. So Google search. That's how I found it in the first place. And if you want to find it and that link doesn't work, that's what I would suggest. So Giorgio Anselmi, he wrote a book called Divinum Opus de Magia Disciplinina, which means the divine work on the discipline of magic. This is written in early 15th century in Italy. Now, again, as I talk about this book, I mean, I certainly would like to have a translation. There is no English translation of this. There's not even a Latin critical edition. It's only available in manuscript. If I had the manuscript, I wouldn't be able to read it in Latin. So again, please don't contact me asking for translation of this, or there isn't one. And I'll talk a little bit more about it as we go into the discussion. But the article is really interesting. You should definitely check that out. So Anselmi was a physician and astrologer. He was trained in the Italian universities in medicine, and at that time, astrology was extremely key for medicine. And if you've done any medieval Renaissance astrology, you recognize how intertwined astrology was with Galenic medicine in terms of the use of astrology for diagnosis, the use of astrology for cures, whether someone's going to recover or not. I mean, I have a CD that's got hundreds and hundreds of pages of traditional texts. And then Lilly in his Christian astrology, for example, has a huge amount in horary on medical astrology, also in the natal section as well. And I like doing medical questions. I actually find them pretty interesting to do. So a little strange because we have the modern medicine and Galenic medicine. Galenic medicine is what's in the traditional Western medicine is in the astrology, but nevertheless, I think really useful to use. So if you're somebody who is trained in basic astrology and then the astrological medicine, then you have all the basic tools that you need to do astrological magic. It's very much like me. I was trained in horary astrology, knowing that basic astrology of the medieval Renaissance. For example, the planets, the zodiac, aspects, essential dignity, all the predictive mechanisms, as well as then understanding electional astrology, which is a sister of horary astrology. You've got all the basics that you need there to do astrological magic timing. So what's interesting about Anselmi is that he really unites two key streams of esotericism and magic in medieval Renaissance Europe, and that is the earlier astrological magic from Arabic sources, really epitomized by Picatrix. The author of this article refers to this also as Hermetic magic. Key to this style is using astrological timing, full chart timing, for the creation of talismans and then invoking astrological spirits. And then the second stream is the Solomonic magic. It's elaborate ritual, binding spirits with the names of God, and really epitomized by the Greater Key of Solomon and other Solomonic grimoires. So these are two sort of separate, not say separate entirely because you can see how they've been synthesized here, but these are two sort of different approaches and traditions that were available to a learned Renaissance, esotericist or astrologer. So what Anselmi does in his methodology, his personal methodology, which is really shown in the article in his book as well, is to synthesize these two types of astrological magic and Solomonic magic to basically put them together. And one of the interesting things it does, for example, is Anselmi talks a lot about working with demons. Now, when he says demon, because that freaks everybody out, demons, Anselmi seems to approach them more like a daemon, which is the earlier Greek, which is, these are spirits that can be good, neutral, and evil. So again, that's what Anselmi does, is he recognizes that, in his view, that there are good demons, neutral, and evil demons. And instead of which is odd, because we think of demon as always being evil. But he's like saying, no, there's good, neutral, and evil. So these are basically, I would say, daemons, these intermediate spirits. His focus, though, however, is on celestial angels. So again, that's more like the astrological magic. In terms of the ritual, it's interesting to see. If you look at Picatrix, you look at the typical astrological magic sources, they say nothing about any kind of magical circles. And they're not into the ritual purification beforehand and all the specialized tools and all that. That's the very Solomonic approach. And so, again, even though Anselmi is doing this astrological magic ritual, he's saying, okay, you've got these circles that you make, you stand in, you hold spirits, you write the characters in. And he provides this really, you can see this cool, this is on page 35 of the article. This is the seal of the omnipotent God. Very Solomonic. I mean, this looks like something right out of the Greater Key of Solomon. And then you wear this to, bind demons or whatever. So again, very interesting to see the influences here. A very Solomonic approach, yet being used in the context also of this astrological magic as well. At the same time, very much what we expect from an astrological, like a Picatrix approach. the timing for making the invocations and the talismans is full chart elections, not a single factor election, not just planetary hour, but full chart elections. Definitely making sure that the planet, if you're making a Jupiter invocation or Jupiter talisman, that the planet is well dignified and unafflicted. Um, the having specific colors and types of clothes, it's like Picatrix, fumigations, various types of incense, invocations of the planet, and then creation of talismans, all very much like the Picatrix. So again, this interesting, combination here of all the stuff. Um, so there's one of the things and what I pulled out of this, I hadn't really focused on the rest of the article, which is what I'm coming back to this now, but there's a great section here that I had used earlier where Anselmi talks about the three types of astrological magic, and he says, well, you can do natural magic, which is just using the astrological timing. And this is very popular. So Ficino talks about this, Albertus Magnus talks about this, because they're afraid of being accused of, consorting with demons. They're like, look, if you just, for example, have Scorpio rising, and you make the image of a scorpion, and the ruler of the eighth is making a square, say to the Mars, which is the ruler of the first, then this is good for getting rid of scorpions. And you can just make this, at this particular time with a picture of a scorpion on it, and it'll work through natural magic. You don't need to do any kind of invocation at all. So that's the first type. Invocation, no invocation, just timing. Then Anselmi mentions, he says, well, you can do a big ritual, with all sorts of ritual elements, just like the Solomonic stuff he's talking about, but then not do astrological timing. So that's another way to do it. And that's typical. There's plenty of magicians nowadays that are doing Jupiter magic, that do all sorts of Jupiter ritual and don't do the astrological timing. But what Anselmi says, and what I agree with, is the strongest type of astrological magic combines those. So you do the astrological timing, so you have the correct timing, and then you also do ritual at that time, and that is the way to produce the strongest talismans or the strongest invocation. So I think that's very interesting. And this is something I had seen before. See, coming from similar influences, coming from a similar background, having a similar worldview, and then being imbued with this medieval Renaissance astrology, this is the intuition that I had about astrological magic, and you can see the exact same intuition has come about from this author as well. Same sources, same influence, same worldview, similar methodologies produces similar results. So as we're looking through this article, then the author article mentions in Anselmi's book, there's a whole bunch of talisman recipes. So it was like, I mean, this is a classic example, and I ran into this so many times as a younger esotericist where I was learning, was that, and before a lot of stuff was translated or available, you'd read some academic article. First of all, it was hard to get it. I couldn't necessarily get it on the internet. I actually have to go to the library sometimes, or for a while I was going to the library just to get internet access of particular databases, because it cost you $30,000 a year to access a database. So even if it's available in electronic form, I couldn't get access to it. So I'd make this sort of journey, make all this effort, download this article, and then this is what it would say. It would just describe it like it's a brown manuscript. It weighs about 3 pounds, and that would be it. Or this is the contents of it, and all these juicy sounding talismans, and no translation, not even the Latin. If at least they gave us the Latin, I could translate it. But if it's like, oh, it's in this particular manuscript in the Vatican or whatever. And maybe that's even available online now, but I can't read it. I mean, you have to be a paleographer. You have to have this specialized training to be able to read these medieval Renaissance manuscripts a lot of the time. So that was always very depressing to me. And it kind of feeds into, I think is true of a lot of esotericists, is this sort of lust for translations. And there's a tendency to sort of pile up a lot of books. That sounds good, I'll buy it. Another hundreds and hundreds of PDFs on your hard drive. And, really what this comes down to is it's kind of like the hook, the advertising and marketing thing for any kind of esoteric books, is that, this particular book is going to have the secret of secrets. And if you all you have to do is read it, and you're like, oh, all I have to do is say abracadabra, boom, and then all will be revealed to me. But, no matter what you get, no matter what books you have, there's always more. There's always seemed like it's like a mirage. It recedes in the distance. And so I think, it's interesting because in looking at this summary and recognizing that, the sources that Anselmi is using, and then the summary there, it's like it helps me be less frustrated about the fact that I don't have a translation of this particular book. Because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to look at that, and a lot of the stuff is going to be familiar, right? There's probably not going to be anything radically crazy change. Now, it'd be nice to have more talismans because it's interesting. I found a new lapidary, and that had a couple, like two or three constellation stuff that had some additional information. So I was able to make talisman, like I did a Cygnus talisman, and I did a Lepus talisman from this. Mirror of Stones is the name of the book by Leonardi, I think is the author's name. It's another Italian Renaissance author. So it added a little bit. It was nice. It was nice to add that, but it wasn't anything crazy radical. It wasn't the sort of revealing of all secrets. It wasn't this sort of ultimate thing. And I think people had that sort of idea about Picatrix. That you just, which Picatrix is amazing. I mean, the amount of information in Picatrix is just out of control. I mean, I can read it and read it again and always get something new out of it, from the philosophical section, and then also the talismanic stuff. It's like, oh my God, we're just going crazy making talismans out of it. I've been doing that for the past 20 years. But nevertheless, really we probably could have gotten away with 3 books of occult philosophy. I mean, that's always been available in English. Has never, since it was translated to English in the 17th century, has always been available to us. But that's kind of old hat. I've seen that already. I want something new. It doesn't reveal everything. And the reality is what we're dealing with is stuff that are arcana, okay? It's hiding in plain sight. And, if you have 3 books of occult philosophy, Picatrix and Hermes on the 15 Fixed Stars, you're all set. I mean, you've got enough for a lifetime as far as making talismans. But you would have to sit down and actually learn medieval Renaissance astrology, and then you got to, really master these. And particularly the other thing to deal with is the whole worldview issue. Because if you're coming at this from an idea, like I said, the academic stuff that's going from this idea, atheistic materialism, nothing really exists except matter and energy. Therefore, again, anything that's talking about spiritual, anything esoteric, magic, astrology is by definition fake. If that's your unconscious view, then you're going to have problems. I don't care what magical book you find, if you don't believe that it really works in your heart of hearts, you're going to have difficulty with it. So I think that's sort of like, again, it's useful for me now to relax with that and say, you know what, yeah, it'd be nice to have a translation. If someone comes out with a translation of a Latin critical edition I can translate, that'll be cool. But it's not going to be anything radically different. There's not going to be like it's hidden from me and then this, because it's not a secret. It's not a one-word thing that's going to suddenly make everything clear. The way everything's going to become clear is through a long process of learning, and then for that knowledge to sink in and essentially turn into wisdom, so that there's an intuitive understanding of the nature of reality and the ability then to work with that system, to understand and trace the spiritual sympathies and interconnections of all things through the celestials, to interface with the celestial spirits, to invoke them, to create talismans. And this is a particular methodological approach that has this long history. And Anselmi is a very interesting example of it. You can see, in a sense, you can see how these two, the astrological magic and Solomonic magic, were combined by him, and he came up with his own system. Very interesting. And again, the idea that because I'm coming from similar influences, I have a similar intuition that he had, I think is also very illustrative as well. So interesting. Check out that article, read it, and then you can restrain yourself from the lust after the translation by recognizing that everything we need is already right here. We basically have all the tools that we need to be astrological magicians. And there's not just one book out there that if I read it, everything would be revealed to it. The study, the practice, and the deep knowledge is really what you need, and really is the reward of this study. So again, thought that was very interesting. I think it's useful to, as a practitioner, have a sense of how to navigate and have a rigorous approach as a practitioner without falling into the sort of newbie, new age, loosey-goosey thing, or to an academic, atheistic, materialistic, excessively scholarly and approach that doesn't help, doesn't work for the practitioner. So again, thought that was very useful and interesting, and I look forward to possibly eventually finding a translation of Anselmi. But if it doesn't, that's okay too.